Motherhood, but not quite as we imagine. Thought-provoking, refreshing, straightforward, sometimes taboo, often seemingly ordinary, but always honest. Welcome to School for Mothers, opening conversations we all need to have, exploring ways in which you can be fulfilled as a woman, once a mother. Now here is your host, mother of 10, Danusha Melina Durban.
Hello and welcome to our second Sunday supplement episode of the School for Mothers podcast. I'm Danusha Melina Durban, your host, and the topic for this week's episode is women and sleep, and my special guest is Helen Driver. There's so much to talk about on sleep, from not getting enough sleep to getting back to sleep after interruptions. Then there's how hormones affect our sleep, our monthly cycles, pregnancy, perimenopause, menopause, and beyond. Quality sleep is necessary for good physical and mental health, as well as dictating our kind of personal and professional performance during our awake time. Women, for example, are far more likely to have greater problems initiating and sustaining sleep, particularly after menopause. Plus, adult women continue to report more on insomnia and are much more prone to sleep disorders in general, which is something that I want to talk with Dr. Helen Driver about. One of the areas that I've been looking at is undiagnosed sleep apnea, which is a really major problem with as many as 90% of women unaware they have the condition. Because of course we have different symptoms than men do, and these are often treated with medication for depression and anxiety, which of course doesn't help sleep apnea. So sleep is something of a really hot topic, as if it couldn't be. I mean, Arianna Huffington, founder of the Huffington Post, cites a good night's sleep is the secret to success. Now, Arianna went from being a workaholic who burned the candle at both ends and viewed sleep dimly to being a sleep advocate. In a 2016 book, The Sleep Revolution, Transforming Your Life One Night at a Time, she suggests we're in the middle of a sleep deprivation crisis. So I really wonder how mothers especially are more likely to be caught up in this crisis. It's a subject close to my heart and gazillions of others. I can't wait to speak with Helen. But before I do, I want to tell you a little bit about my guest, Dr. Helen Driver. She's a somnologist at Kingston Health Sciences Centre and Queen's University, Canada, where she manages a 6-bed sleep lab. She's a past president of the Canadian Sleep Society and on the board of registered polysomnographic technologists. She's originally from South Africa and has a PhD in physiology. I have a host of questions for Helen, and some of these questions also come from members on the School for Mothers Facebook group. They've shared their questions with me, so I won't keep you waiting any longer. Let's dive into my conversation on everything to do with sleep with Dr. Helen Driver. It's a privilege to have Dr. Helen Driver with us today, talking all things sleep. And I know that so many listeners are really looking forward to hearing what you have to say, Helen, today. So welcome.
Thank you, Danusha.
Oh, now, tell me. I'm intrigued to know what the differences between men and women are. I'm guessing there are. I know there are, but not because I've looked this up or researched it. But would you outline the key differences in the genders about sleep?
Okay. The differences between men and women are not very huge, but I wanted to start out by saying that we all go through the same cycles of sleep. So just so everybody understands, we have rapid eye movement sleep, REM sleep, which is when most of our dreaming occurs. So it's more a vivid kind of brain, a very active brain at that time. And we have non-rapid eye movement sleep, which composes of most of the night. And we also have the very deep phase of sleep when it's most difficult to wake you is during that non-REM phase of sleep. So those go through cycles of around 90 minutes. So all of us need a good sleep duration, which on average is between 7 and 8 hours are the recommended times. And within that, it seems that women tend to go to bed a little earlier than men. So we tend to be more lark-like. And we also may have a higher sleep need. And in big data studies, and it depends how the numbers are collected, but it seems that women may need around 15 to 20 minutes more sleep time than men. So what's the significance of that? And maybe it just means that women might have a higher sleep need, a higher pressure for sleep, but it also may mean that women are a little bit more vulnerable, if you like, to the impact of sleep restriction, sleep deprivation than men are.
And that's a little bit unfortunate, isn't it, for mothers,
Absolutely.
really?
Yes.
I mean,
especially when you consider that, looking after children at home, your sleep will be more disturbed.
Yeah, exactly. So 7 to 8 hours. I'm guessing that we have listeners that are gawping at that, like, yeah, right. As if I ever get 7 to 8 hours.
I know. And, you tend to see that. I think for most of us, if you feel like you're getting a good 6 hours of sleep a night, that's at least comforting to know. But within that spectrum, there is a group of people who are short sleepers and people who are long sleepers. So the only way you know if you're getting the right amount of sleep is how do you feel when you wake up. If you wake up and the first thing you think about is, I've got to get a cup of coffee, then you know that you didn't get enough sleep during the day. It's really how refreshed do you feel when you wake up in the morning.
So a person that doesn't feel refreshed, what will this kind of signs be, apart from that, oh, I really need a cup of coffee to wake me up? But are there any others that are common symptoms?
So really the most common initial one seems to be a negative mood. So sleep restriction or insufficient sleep impacts mood very significantly. It impacts memory. And it also just impacts focus and general healthy well-being. But we really recognize the mood factors especially. So it means that just your shortness of temper, your focus on things that are going wrong instead of focusing on things that are going right, your ability just to coordinate things, multitask as much as we need to during the day becomes impacted. So it's really those psychological things that we see in the first instance. And then more the long-term ones that we are recognizing are more metabolic syndrome. So it impacts on our appetite regulation, our metabolism, and that's really more in the long term. And when you see it, a lot of the studies are focusing on shift work, for example. So that's a category of people who have long-term consequences as well of having their sleep altered.
Yeah, and when you talk about metabolism, is that linked to weight gain, sustaining weight? I mean, in what way?
Yes. So some of the studies looking at, there's a group that have done some research in Quebec where they've taken families and followed families over a number of years. And you see that those with shorter sleep duration have an increased tendency to gain weight. So we recognize also that there's some metabolic impact on that. Some studies that have been done have looked at restricting sleep time and keeping people on a regular kind of a caloric intake. And along that time with restricted sleep intake, we see an increase in the hormone that makes you feel hungry. It comes from the gut. It's called ghrelin. And that increases your appetite. And the hormone that makes you feel satiated, that makes you feel full, which is called leptin, goes lower. So you have those two things also compounding. So we've spoken about, your metabolism that's impacted, your mood and your memory are all factors that are impacted with restricted or shorter sleep duration.
But there are also people that, as you say, are short sleepers, aren't they? So, for instance, Margaret Thatcher, bless her, in the centre of her power, is it in the 70s? I really don't know. But, a long time ago, she was said to be, a woman who needed 3 to 4 hours sleep. And that's what she survived on for years.
She is well known as being a short sleeper. Someone like Winston Churchill is also a notoriously short sleeper. And I think, for people, they can cope with being short sleepers for a short period of time. But you're right, some people are naturally short sleepers. That's their genetic makeup. So that's where I meant earlier on. So the norm is 7 to 8 hours, but you do get people on either end. And it really is, you recognize whether you're able to cope. And, simply put, sleep is a biological need. It's a drive that we all have. within that drive, some people have a shorter sleep duration and others a longer sleep duration. We also have groups of people who feel that, sleep is a waste of time. And I often think of the category of, are you Edison or are you Einstein? So Edison, who developed the light bulb, did not think that sleep was important. He thought it was a waste of time. Maybe that's what helped him to focus on developing the light bulb. But someone like Einstein really used his sleep and valued his sleep, and he was a long sleeper. So sometimes people ask me, does having shorter sleep mean that you might be a genius or you might be super productive, like Winston Churchill, Margaret Thatcher, and so on. But, at the other end of the spectrum is that we have people who recognize the value of, for them, needing a longer sleep time. But in general, that, yes, we all need to make sure that we put sleep as one of our pillars of good health in order to then make sure that we function properly when we're awake.
Yeah, it's great. I've loved those two examples of different people that made enormous impact on the world. Well, several people, all four of them. I'm wondering, would you think that those four people, Churchill and Thatcher and Edison and Einstein,
yes,
were they like that as children? Do you think?
Yes, I am pretty sure. So you also see that it runs in families, just as, if we think about people with having insomnia, that also tends to have a family predisposition. Just the same short and long sleepers. So people often tell me, my child just doesn't sleep well, or they need less sleep time. So parents can know from early on, as long as they're making sure that they do keep a good routine with those kids. So yes, just right from the get-go, for some, you recognize that they are shorter or longer and good sleepers.
Yeah, fascinating, isn't it, that? So you've actually established that there are very few differences. I was really disappointed when you said that, actually, between men and women.
Well, I'll get over it. I think that's great, because it does mean, sleep as a requirement for life. And we actually still don't know. Like, people often say, what is the function of sleep? And we actually don't have a function of sleep. It has many functions. And kind of the flavor of the moment is the role of sleep in memory. A couple of years ago, the big focus was on metabolism, which we've spoken about. And we were talking about mood earlier on. So it's really multifaceted. And I think that's where we see the need for going through different sleep cycles. So you have your non-REM, you have your REM. Your part is more for your body than for your brain. And there's got to be a reason why it goes through in that pattern and in that cycle through the course of the night. So feeding back into just a normal sleep cycle, when you first go to sleep, you have your deepest sleep of the night. And we see that with kids, when they just fall asleep, they are out, and it's very hard to wake them. And then about 90 minutes after you've fallen asleep, you have a period of your rapid eye movement sleep, which is a very active brain in a paralyzed body. So your body doesn't move, your brain is very active. And then you'll go back into a cycle of non-REM sleep. That next phase of non-REM is still deep, but not as deep as the first cycle that you had. And then as we go through the course of the night towards the early morning, you have more rapid eye movement, REM sleep. So the way sleep is designed makes sense in that when you first go to sleep, it's deep. We have a lot of growth hormone being secreted at that time. Very important for kids. And adults, actually, as we get older, you all still need your restorative phase and recovery phase of sleep. And then as we get to the early hours of the morning, you have longer periods of rapid eye movement sleep. And again, making sense, because by that phase, you're getting ready, if you like, to wake up in the morning. So sometimes people ask, if I'm going to then time my sleep, how long should it be? Well, people's cycles might vary slightly in length. If you've done more physical activity, so for example, moms who are really busy and physically active during the day, if you watch with your kids, the same thing. When you first go to sleep, you'll have a higher proportion of deep sleep in the beginning. And then that's your recovery phase, your physical recovery, and then the brain cycles of rapid eye movement sleep come through and show more towards the early hours of the morning. But having said that, we still have cycles of non-REM and REM through the course of the night. So in terms of waking up, if you happen to wake somebody up during their deep non-REM phase of sleep, you feel like you have a sleep hangover. Your mind is groggy. It's very difficult to just snap out of your sleep phase into a wide awake. Whereas if you wake up from your rapid eye movement sleep, it's easier to be awake because your brain is already in a more close to awake phase. So sometimes people who sleep for an extra long period of time may go back into a non-REM period of sleep and then feel like they're waking up with a sleep hangover. I'm just reminded of my niece who asked me, like she said, she likes to nap, and she was saying, like, how long should I be napping for? And I said, well, you want to nap for less than an hour. So the ideal is you have a coffee if you are going to be drinking coffee. Have a coffee, have a 20-minute nap, and then you should be awake and ready to go because the caffeine kicks in and then you're up and out of the time. But if you're sleeping for around 75 minutes or 60 minutes, you may be waking up from a slow wave deep sleep. So, because this was what made her ask me the question, because when she was waking up, she was experiencing that sleep hangover.
Yeah, sleep hangovers, gosh. Which we'll come on to actual hangovers in a minute and sleep. I know we will. I just know we're going to do that. But fascinating. So what are the most common challenges in, top 3 sleep challenges that women face that you know of, that you see?
Maybe I'll just put that, when you ask about the top 3, I'll rather just put it through the 3 phases, if you like, of women's reproductive life. So if we look at menstrual cycle, actually one of the other things I didn't mention when we were talking about the gender difference is that women are also more likely to suffer from insomnia than men. And we see that start in puberty. And that really is when menstrual cycles start to kick in, right? So we see a very small, which I think is a good thing. You don't see very big differences in your sleep between the follicular, so pre-ovulation, and post-ovulation in the luteal phase. We see for a lot of women experiencing pain around menstruation, that their sleep is disturbed then. It's predictable. People know about it. Sometimes people would go on to oral contraceptives to alleviate that. So that's the most common, complaint. And then that's obviously about every month, people would be having painful menstruation disrupting their sleep. The next phase for women would be going through pregnancy, which is really multifaceted in terms of looking at the 3 trimesters. So the first trimester often, sleepiness would be a factor. Some women have more restless legs starting at that time. Snoring can start at that time. The second trimester, if you like, is more of a settling in period where your sleep isn't as disturbed. It kind of everything evens out for a period. And then the last trimester where there's more discomfort again, with increased urination and movements and trying to get comfortable at nighttime. So those are already huge changes that women have had to go through. Then the child rearing. And then the last phase really looking at menopause, where with the withdrawal of hormones, we start to see things like hot flashes disrupting sleep. And sometimes not even the hot flash, it's just that women's sleep becomes more fragmented too. So in terms of the 3 main factors, it's really dealing with the 3 periods of our reproductive life that women land up experiencing additional changes in their sleep.
So those are caused by the hormonal shifts during those 3 main stages. And also, you skated over child rearing, which is like, I'm slightly like, I've got my head in my hands. Yes, Helen, you were. Like, okay, so those were, the other sleep challenges were obviously caused by those hormonal changes, but the actual practicalities of the child rearing bring specific sleep challenges for women. Yeah.
Right. So, Danisha, thank you for bringing me back out of the physiology realm, which is really the anatomical and hormonal changes. And yes, so the child rearing, the behavior, the family situation is really the factor that has quite long-term consequences. A lot of women who speak with me about their sleep often say that their sleep became disturbed was when they had kids in the home, so from having the infant at home. So really the main recommendation is to protect your sleep as much as you can. Sleep when baby sleeps. Forget about, the dust bunnies and whatever else gather around the house. I'm sure you tell all your moms this too. So to really optimize sleep as much as you can. If you have people who can share the load in terms of looking after night feeds and so on, that would be the thing to do. And also, just as one is teaching infant children the importance of a regular routine at bedtime, the same goes for parents. And I'm even thinking of taking it further than that, mentioning about for some women that their sleep problems happen with their children. And later on, it's perpetuated. The thing that you have to do is bring it back to working out a regular routine. So the bedtime, going to bed routine is important. And what people often then don't think about focusing on bedtime is also to focus on the rise time, what happens with getting up in the morning. So to keep each of those as routine and regular as one can.
And what are the elements that will make that going to bed and rise time most effective? And I realize that we're all so different, but yes, are there some common factors that really do seem to help?
So common facts go back to some of the other things I would be thinking about. If you include meal times as being regular, include a downtime phase, and part of the routine might also be the bathing routine in the evenings, reading time. And importantly now, and increasingly important, is to take technology out of the bedroom. So this is a good time for bonding with parents or siblings so that they together reading something or doing some bedtime, quiet time activity to settle down for the night. For me, it's not a good thing to be using a device or some kind of technology in terms of helping to soothe the child. I know there are devices out there, and those have certainly helped people where, they just stretch to the limit and use that as a routine, those kind of rockers or soothing devices. But mostly it's a good time to make sure that it's a family wind down time, family time to get off to bed at a regular time.
So really you're advocating, apart from, I'm assuming you're not advocating an adult rocker, but although that may be part of the thing of, I realize that's kind of metaphorical of getting into the quietening the mind and actually detaching from anything that zhuzhes up the brain pattern that keeps us, awake and lively. So food, doing anything that we do with children, but creating that soothing pattern for ourselves to enable our own sleep. What about the rising?
So I just want to finish touching on something that I can't emphasize. Like going to bed should be a real pleasure at nighttime. That you're in a comfortable space. Your head hits the pillow. It's cocooned. It should really be that it's something that you look forward to. It's a treat. It's a pleasure, as well as it's something we get for free that improves your everyday life. So just having that mindset in terms of, and I'm sure most mothers, all mothers look forward to that time of night going to bed. And the waking up part is also
Can I just stop you there a minute? But while we're on that pleasure, because I really love that point, are there any conditions that, such as pillows, duvets, kind of, what are the conditions that could typically create a more pleasure-filled, apart from a lack of screaming kids, by the way,
right.
But the kind of conditions that we might be able to put in place? What might they be?
So number one is a dark and quiet space. So, what you can't do much about with children, but at least to make sure that within your own environment, that it's a quiet and darkened room. In terms of, pillows, duvet, and so on, that really is a very individual, whether you like flannel sheets or silk sheets or whatever. That's whether people sleep in pajamas or they sleep naked. Those are all things that are so individual.
Yeah.
But the main issue for me is to make sure that the environment is quiet and dark. People would be using night lights, but use that in the passageway or somewhere else so that within your room environment, your sleeping environment is darkened.
What about temperature? Because a lot of people have central heating
very
on at
important.
Night.
Yes, and usually you would lower the temperature of the ambient temperature at nighttime. Again, just using that as a cocooning thing. Hot environment is more disruptive than a cooler environment for sleep. And I'm really talking of, like just on the edges of what is comfortable. Yeah. And again, the temperature that people select to use would be very variable. And I've often heard that this is a matter of contention between bed partners because one likes it hot and one likes it cold. So if you like it hot, then, maybe a small heating pad, like one of those nice back massage kind of whatever, just so that it's in your side versus your sleeping partner's side. So a very individual.
Oh, it is, isn't it? It's very individual. Yes. And typically men seem to live at a higher body temperature for sleep, it would appear. So they need fewer covers. I'm sounding like I've done extensive research. I hasten to add, it's actually anecdotal from girlfriends.
We are all experts in sleep because we all sleep and we all know what works for us and what doesn't. So it's really just putting that together. And again, I'm so delighted that you're doing this because it's really the fact for me is that you have to prioritize sleep. If you're not getting enough sleep, things just tend to fall apart during the day. And I know we've all experienced that.
They do. And so before we finish with the bedtime routine, does sex make for better sleep?
Yes. If it's good sex, yes.
I'm so glad you put that caveat in. I wasn't expecting that, but thank you. And that's obviously very subjective. Yes. Yeah.
So there's actually very few studies. There's very few studies on the impact. When I remember, recruiting university students, there were some things that we said they'd always be happy to come and volunteer for. But I guess getting some of them through ethics boards are a different story. So.
Yes. Damn, that would have been such fun. The research of it, not the doing.
That's exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, so but you have a sense that decent sex is actually good. It's beneficial for sleep. Why would that be?
That's beyond my realm of expertise. Maybe that could be a good topic for another expert to come and talk on. Mm-hmm.
I'll seek that person out. I think because I think that's going to be of interest now. But I've just put that down there, listeners, for you. I will be getting an expert on why sex before sleep is very good for you. Okay, good. So Helen, rise with us. Help us rise in the morning.
So again, then that is, people often think about the bedtime timing as being important, but especially for those who are really trying to get their days going, waking up at a regular time in the morning. During the week, and this is where people don't like it, as well as on the weekends. So there's been a more recent study, though, looking at does weekend sleep matter? Because the reality of our life is that during the week, people restrict their sleep time. And that's really, again, because it's anchored towards the time to get up for school, for work, and so on. So on the weekends, people tend to, and we all love it, is to lie in bed a little bit longer. So the issue with that is to recognize that if you've if you've slept later in on Sunday morning, Sunday night might take you longer to fall asleep. the issue for that is it just means your duration of wakefulness through the day when your sleep need increases is shorter. So it's often, we talk about it as, say, Monday morning blues, where people slept in on Sunday morning and then took a longer time to fall asleep on Monday night. But there have been some reports saying that ultimately weekend sleep does have an impact in terms of if you're using it as a catch-up. And we do recognize that people having restricted sleep during the week tend to catch up a little bit on their sleep on the weekend.
Yes. I mean, for those that can get it, they do. Yeah, absolutely. But maybe there's one listener.
In your experience, if I could ask, Danusha, what age group of children do you think when are they the most active and awake in the morning?
Oh, it really depends on the child. I mean, some children, once you've gone beyond the feeding through the night phase, then it becomes obvious the sleep pattern of a child, whether they are one of those short sleepers, whether they have a brain that doesn't turn off, doesn't soothe itself and stop easily, or whether it's, a child that actually requires a huge amount of sleep.
Right.
So I think I've obviously got 10, and so I've seen all kinds of patterns. I can think of some that I have that require a lot of sleep.
Yes.
One particularly, even now requires a good 12 hours. As a young adult, good 12 hours, and really does need, 10. This person needs to, I won't say who it is because I just, for privacy's sake, haven't got consent. But, kind of a 7-hour sleep for this child of mine would be really awful.
Yes.
And that for me sometimes I'm a 5-hour person, and that's great. I'm singing on that. I'm it's really good.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't really know.
Well, I mean, you've really covered that people really know, if they need more sleep or not. So sometimes when it is to the extreme and people are falling asleep during the day, that can lead into assessing whether they have a sleep disorder. But, parents say, the times their children start school and they take away the nap, those kids really suffer because they just really need that extra little bit of sleep time. But I'm thinking in general, with kids, the time they're probably the most active in terms of age group and they're the best sleepers at night is around the age of 7 to 10-year-olds. So that's really a good time to optimize their sleep, and then hopefully parents' sleep is improved by then too.
Well, exactly. So that period, that pre-adolescence period, that is, I mean, in actual fact, that's probably the best time to actually be a parent. They still like you. They still like you. They haven't realized that you're horrid in their eyes. They're not being rude, and they sleep. If they're a sleeper, they sleep well. Obviously, there are many variations on that. For instance, special needs children, I'm not going to blanket them because they're so very, very different and complex. That a lot of sleep issues can arise. But I'm just getting back to mothers. So I think I may have stopped you. Tell us what the top challenges are. Apart from, I know you said menstrual cycles, pregnancy, menopause. So they're the timings in a woman's life, that bring on different sleep issues. Would you say sleep deprivation or sleep disturbance and sleep deprivation?
Sleep disturbance would be, maybe more of a catch-all, and that would cover both because, often I use the term sleep restriction, which means you're still getting enough sleep, or you're still getting some sleep. And for me, when we use the term sleep deprivation, that's really more extreme. Yep. And when you see some of the studies, you are worrying about being, 5 or 6 hours. So really, when we group sleep looking at consequences and they look at short sleep duration, longer sleep duration, the middle is usually 6 to 8 hours, and anything less than 6 and over 8 would be generally how it's grouped. So if you're getting 6 hours, then that's as much as you need. We've verified that, and you're a short sleeper, then that's good for you. For some people, then getting less than 6 hours and they know that they feel that they're not getting enough sleep, then that would be sleep restriction. the other factor is where your sleep is disrupted during the night. As a parent, that would be with kids, infants, night feeding, having sick kids at home.
Yeah.
That's very disruptive to your sleep. But usually if you sleep deprived enough, you'd get back into bed and be able to go right back to sleep. And that's part of the beauty of it. If it's at nighttime, you try not to expose yourself to any bright lights, using low night lights and so on, just to make sure that you stay in a darkened environment. We should never underestimate the impact of light and how it increases our alertness. So just during the morning light, we get more blue light in the morning, and we should be getting more red light at night. So for people using devices, that's become a sleep stealer in terms of exposure to blue light at nighttime. So you do get blue light blocking glasses, you get, night shift shades or whatever on your device. I encourage people to use those. But even more as part of the bedtime routine, as I've mentioned earlier, is just shut down the technology. If you have dogs, you go and walk them later at night and so on. So that's all part of the routine. And in terms of then, I think what people do struggle with, so we talk about insomnia in terms of sleep onset, so difficulty falling asleep. We talk about sleep maintenance insomnia, where it's hard to stay asleep, and then terminal insomnia, where people wake up in the early hours of the morning. But in the realm of what we've been talking about, it's really sleep fragmentation because of external factors. But even so, if your ability to maintain sleep is disturbed, it will always take you usually take you longer to fall asleep again once you've had a little bit of sleep. So don't let that stress you out. Just use that part of falling asleep, use relaxation techniques, some mindfulness techniques to help you to get back to sleep, recognizing that it's not unusual for it to take a little bit longer than the first time you fell asleep.
Yeah, so subsequent disturbances, really you're then multiply having to go through that mindfulness, whatever it is you choose. Do you have any favorites?
I tried for a while, which I really thought worked pretty well, was the letters, where you use 4-letter words and then you build, you make another word on top of that one. But I just find visual imagery is something that always works for me.
Tell us more about visual imagery. What do you mean?
So it's really just to go to a space where you feel safe, where you feel comfortable. For me, it's a garden in Cape Town where there's a specific this botanical garden. There's a specific spot that, I try and just take myself back into that. So for a lot of people, it would be a nature scene, a calming scene to just help them to focus. And part of it is remembering the different aspects of the setting that you were in.
Yeah, so focusing on that. I have lived by the sea for years now, and in one house that I lived in, I was literally facing the beach, and I could watch the waves go in and out. And that's for 5 years. For 5 years, that's what I could, if I opened the window, I could actually hear that, which would be very soothing, but also I can visualize that. And even now, even though we're in a different home, I can see that and I visualize that at night.
Wonderful.
And it really helps that rhythmic kind of, it's visual, but it's almost what you were talking about with the rocking, actually. So yes, do we age due to sleep restriction? I mean, how much do we age?
Oh, that's such a good question. Do we age as, I remember, and I can't remember where it was, from a Scandinavian country. They had, they looked, do you age? They had pictures of people of students after different amounts of sleep time, and rating looks as, good looking to ugly, and the ratings of people who didn't have enough sleep. So it's just in terms of your beauty sleep is what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
It really does have a factor. But I think, does not getting enough sleep age you? It's such a beautiful question. And I think for me personally, it does, but it's then how, in terms of measuring age, we've spoken about metabolic things. We didn't mention too much about memory, but there certainly are a lot of excellent studies out now showing the role of sleep in clearing your brain of beta amyloid to make sure that we keep our memory functioning optimally. So, I think in terms of, it might be more of the brain that we get more aging if you don't get enough sleep. But it's certainly, I mentioned earlier about growth hormone being released during sleep. So it certainly is for the body as well as for the brain.
So can we replace that memory beta, whatever you just called it, which I can't remember?
So it's beta amyloid. Well, it builds up during the day, and it's flushed out, if you like. It's cleared out of the brain during the sleep phases. So that's really fascinating new research. But I think in terms of, does restricted sleep lead to increased, that means you age faster? I would say yes, but again, I don't know how you would, there's got to be ways of measuring that.
Well, also, I was, in terms of you talking about the memory, because that's another of my questions. You were tying them nicely together, actually, which is, does sleep restriction affect memory? Which, of course, you've already said it does. But is there anything that anybody can do? Because one of the big problems for mothers in the phase when their children are up, a lot, is that memory fog during pregnancy. Actually, it's also it's reported to be, as you know, during menopause, that memory fog that can descend on women, that they just don't have the sharpness and clarity that they once might have experienced. And I was just wondering, is there actually anything that can be done about that? Or is it a case of, this too shall pass? I don't know. I know that there are listeners wanting, like, please, Helen, please tell us. What do I buy?
Tell me to optimize my sleep.
Yeah.
Is the recommendation.
Yeah. So get more sleep.
Sleep is one of the things that costs you nothing. Like, it's something you get for free, which would certainly improve all of those factors. I have to add that coffee is the second most traded commodity in the world. So to me, that's the main indicator that we live in a sleep-restricted society. And coffee does certainly improve your wakefulness. It certainly improves your memory, but making sure that you get enough sleep, or as much as you can under the circumstances, is certainly the way you can improve your memory.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk a little bit about snoring.
Okay.
Now, it's not a popular topic for women.
No.
It's really not, is it? It's just not. It's men. It's assumed that, well, he's a snorer. Not all men are snorers. Of course, I'm not suggesting that. But we don't talk snoring. We'd rather talk incontinence, I think. Leakage.
How many times I think to get up to the washroom? Yes. So snoring is real, and it's not very ladylike apparently to snore. I have a deviated septum, so I know. And when we breathe, we go through nostril cycles. So you breathe through one nostril more predominantly for 4 hours, and then it goes through the other side. So
how fascinating.
It depends which side you lie on. So, with my deviated septum, I know that my snoring is going to be much worse when I'm sleeping, on my right side, because the left side. Anyway, so you just have to figure out where it is. So there's anatomical reasons for snoring. Of course, we haven't touched on alcohol, but
let's touch on it then.
Also, briefly, yes. So alcohol will also increase snoring. And also women in early pregnancy. So estrogen causes a swelling in the lining, rhinorrhea in the nose. So you do get more snoring for women, can start in the early part of pregnancy. And we, of course, know that men snore much more than women. And that really is related to men having more obstructive sleep apnea than women do. So snoring is an early sign. At least when you're snoring, the air is still going in and out through a narrowed airway. What I meant by sleep apnea means without breath. And that's really when people are not breathing, and obstructive is when the airway is closed off, physically obstructed. So the two go together. An airway narrowing initially, air is still getting in and out. to a complete closure of the airway when people have apnea. So sometimes people hear snoring and then they're quite relieved when the snoring stops. But when the snoring stops, if the person's not awake, it literally means that they are holding their breath, that no air is getting in. And then the breakthrough snoring happens again once they wake up and the muscle tone improves to open the airway again. So that can be very disruptive. And for anyone suffering from sleep apnea, that constantly waking up in order to start breathing properly again is very disruptive for their sleep.
Yeah, because they'll be back
as well as their sleeping partner, as well as their bed partner, I should say.
Yes, who's unlikely to be sleeping.
Exactly. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and so many couples do resort to sleeping in separate bedrooms because snoring of one party or the other. I do have friends where it's the wife whose snoring is worse than her husband's, but that is a very big factor. And we know that therapy will actually alleviate. Part of using effective therapy is that the snoring will stop as well.
Which kind of therapy?
So therapy would vary from positional. So it's always worse when you're in a supine position on your back. So sleep on your side. The other, or slightly elevated. The other is an oral appliance. Depends on how bad your apnea is, but an oral appliance will pull the lower jaw forward, and that keeps the airway patent and open properly, so that the snoring and breathing resumes. And otherwise, people wear a mask, and that's called CPAP, continuous positive airway pressure. So it literally means getting fitted with a mask, and it uses air like a reverse vacuum cleaner. Basically, it pushes air through the airway to keep the airway open properly so that people can sleep and breathe at the same time.
Yeah, and I imagine that there will be listeners that are wondering whether they snore for a start, whether because it's such a taboo subject for women to discuss. It really is. And there will be people with sleep apnea that may not realize, or they may recognize what you're talking about with their partner. So, all these solutions they're out there, aren't they? They're where do people go to?
Yes, well, I'm glad you asked that, Danisha, because if people do have sleep apnea and recognize those symptoms, and one of the ways it manifests mostly is that people are excessively tired during the day. So snoring, you wake up with a dry mouth, you have a headache in the morning, and you have difficulty staying awake. Not everybody has excessive daytime sleepiness, and women actually tend to complain more of insomnia as a symptom of sleep apnea. If you do suspect that you have that, it would be to speak with your family physician and to then get a referral to a sleep specialist.
Yeah.
So I run a sleep disorders lab, and we test people. They come in. Sleep apnea is the biggest thing we see people for, but there are obviously a number of other sleep disorders that we would assess people for and treat them as well.
Like sleepwalking and sleep eating.
Right. So those fall into a category called parasomnia, so unusual behaviors in their sleep. There's also a new category we were talking about sex earlier, called sexsomnia, where people have sexual acts in their sleep. But basically, it's any unusual behaviors aside from sleeping. So we see parasomnias, sleepwalking and sleep talking, are more common in children, and we tend to grow out of them as adults. But often stress or sleep deprivation are things that can make parasomnia manifest again. The other, people talk about nightmares and night terrors. So those are two different things. Nightmares happen during your rapid eye movement phase of sleep. We see more now with people with post-traumatic stress disorder, for example, that they enact their dreams. So they have something called REM sleep behavior disorder. And that is different than what we see in children, which is called night terrors. And they literally, can be screaming at night. But when parents go into the room, the child is still obviously asleep, and they actually have to really shake them to wake them up. And they have no mental recollection of why they were screaming. which is different than a nightmare again. A nightmare people would vividly describe, like I saw eyes in the room or something. Mm-hmm. So those also fall under the category of parasomnias. And then sleepwalking, often, people have moved home and the child had got habituated towards going to the bathroom in one direction and they haven't reorientated properly. So they might land up, going to the closet or the wardrobe instead of the bathroom. So those things, and then people can always have a rational explanation for that too.
There is one area that we haven't touched on, and it's actually not about mothers. As you know, we don't really talk about children too much, despite being the School for Mothers podcast, but it's bedwetting.
Right.
This is I was probably not your area at all, but I just wondered, boys seem to wet the bed much later than girls.
Yes, and it could
generally
be about 2 years longer. And also, if there's been another sibling joining in the home. So, within that, there's a whole lot of behavioral things that people do. And I know, it becomes a big issue with kids needing to go off, for summer camp or something like that.
Yeah.
So, there are nasal sprays that they can use, desmopressin, which does help to contain the urine. So the other thing that people do is to do scheduled awakenings to get the children up so that they do empty their bladder. And some bladder, like the Kegel exercises training so that they learn. So part of it is that the kids are just heavy sleepers. Some of them are very deep sleepers, so the signal from the bladder to the brain doesn't get there in time. Because their sleep is so deep. And then the other is just that they need to improve the muscle control on their bladders. But it does become it's a very big deal, when these kids then are anxious about going to sleep anywhere else. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I just wondered, the nasal spray is interesting because it's not something I've looked into, but I know I have friends that have, got boys of, past double figures that are still wetting beds or actually still in nappies, in diapers.
Right.
They have to be.
Yes. I heard an interesting story recently with that, and that really is, it's got to be a combination, also just training bladder control, but there is a nasal spray that they can take for just that very thing if they are going somewhere else away from home.
Yeah, exactly. So I have a question from one of our listeners, and she asked, is sleep going to affect my ability to succeed?
Of course, I would say yes. The model, and she's actually got a book out herself now, is Arianna Huffington at the moment. She's on this crusade to get everybody to sleep because basically she recognized that she was not getting enough sleep and she literally fell asleep at her desk.
And is that Arianna with Thrive?
Yes, so, just exactly. And she's now, telling everybody the importance of good sleep. We also see that, so in terms of ability to succeed, I think if you're talking about being able to succeed in terms of being, all-rounded, in terms of recognizing the role that behavior plays, good leadership plays, sleep certainly has an impact in those subtle manifestations of leadership and impulse control and so on. So without naming any names, it certainly does have a factor in terms of people's self-control. Self-regulation is what sleep. Self-regulation is what sleep is, another big factor in terms of the role that sleep plays.
Yeah, and I guess our ability to be resilient. And as you, at the beginning of this wonderful conversation, you talked a lot about the negative mood and the ability to regulate mood and actually having negative mood. And I think so that sense of hopefulness and of stamina, it's a word we haven't used, but sleep gives us tremendous stamina in life. And so I'm guessing however we define success, because we all have such very different definitions of it, if we have stamina, then we have a good kind of ability to maybe go for it, our own version. Whereas if we don't, well, it's impeded, isn't it? Our ability to actually go for what we want is really, it's just going to be blocked. Absolutely. It's an obstacle. So
I love that you used the word stamina and resilience. And really, I think that does encapsulate it. And flexibility. I mean, that's one of the things through life.
Mm-hmm.
Like we really need to be able to focus on the positive, to figure out, how resilience, and as you mentioned, everybody has a different measure of success. But I think the nature of just being respectful, good people, and resilient, that's a beautiful word.
Wow, I love our broad-ranging journey through sleep and all sorts of crevices, all sorts of ways that you've talked about it. It's made me really want to dive in further into some of these areas because it is fascinating. Thank you so much, Helen, for a really wide-ranging conversation. It was really lovely.
You are so welcome, Danusha, and I'm so happy that you've highlighted a topic that's vital for good, healthy living, and that's sleep.
It is. Thank you so much, Helen.
Thank you.
Well, it's become obvious that the importance of good sleep behaviours isn't to be underestimated, is it? So creating new habits, those new habits that Helen talked about, keeping our bedroom quiet, dark, and devoted to nothing but sleep. Well, apart from that, good sex, right? And of course, this will follow on from the evening winding down rituals that might include meditation or a warm bath. This is all sounding rather lovely, but I'm wondering how to get this together with teens around and even, fractious toddlers, etc. Nevertheless, I love the idea of it. So, of course, banning electronics from our bedroom, yes, huge yes to that. And to treat sleep as pleasure, music to my ears, really loved that. Lots to think about, that's for sure. I'm really grateful to Helen for all she's given us to think about. Before we go, let me tell you about what's coming up next on the School for Mothers podcast on Wednesday. My guest, Dr. Shoshana Garfield, will bring us lessons from a life that many of us can never imagine possible. The episode is aptly called Souled. I won't spoil it for you by saying really why we called it Souled. All I want you to know is this will be like no other conversation that you've ever listened into. I really know that. I promise you that. If you've enjoyed today's podcast, make sure you subscribe on iTunes or wherever you listen to this podcast and tell your friends about us too. There's so many women and men globally listening in, for which I'm ever so grateful. Thank you so much. It's wonderful. Our next Sunday supplement will be released on the 28th of April in 2 weeks. And the topic is streamlining, Marie Kondo style. That's all I can say. I know, I'm such a tease. See you same time, same place. Meet me here. Thank you for joining us again. Here's to you.
Thank you for tuning in to the School for Mothers podcast. To continue the conversation and keep your dose of inspiration up, head over to schoolformothers.com/podcast, where you'll find bonus content from Danusha and her guests on habits, recommendations, books, best apps, time-saving secrets, life hacks, health, sleep, and anything in between. That's schoolformothers.com/podcast.